let's start. I think that, yes, it's 2:30, so we can start, and maybe later some of...
Eduardo.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, Eduardo is joining to the session.
Okay.
Okay, I can see him. Eduardo, can you hear me? Can you see me? Yeah. Okay. Hello. Nice to see you. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's start this session. The right to health and health care and equitable access to vaccination during COVID-19 pandemic. This is a big, huge privilege for me, welcoming our speakers and also the chair of this session, Professor Tatiana Barandova, Northwest Institute of Management at the Russia Academy of National Economy and Public Administration from Russia. So we have more or less 15 minutes per person, and maybe Professor Comparato. I'm afraid that there is some technical problem with connection. However, I hope that he will join to the session a little bit later. Okay, so Tatiana, the floor is open.
Okay.
So let's go.
Let's go. Thank you very much, Jerzy, for introducing, and I would really happy to see all of our speakers here, and I would like to start with announcement of the first.
I'm sorry, Tatiana, I should add that you are also Secretary RC26.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerzy. Yeah. It's important information because maybe some of the speakers today will join the activity of the Secretariat and the committee in general for actually coming time of our common, you know, how to say, common ideas sharing and activities as well. And thank you very much once again. And I'm once again really happy to see all of us here. And I would like to introduce the first speakers. Will you, Eduardo Torres, will you give the presentation by yourself, or you will have it in a sharing way with your co-author? Yeah. If you are going to, do you hear me? Just to check, do you hear me? No response. I can't hear. Let me start with chat.
It's my mistake too. Eduardo, please, if I may, of course, please unmute the microphone, okay? Because we can't hear your voice. And
Eduardo, it's are you sorry? Good morning from Mexico. Are you calling for Eduardo? Okay. He doesn't have I don't know what a technical problem with his microphone. So I am Andreas Maniego. I grew up with.
Okay, thank you. Floor is yours. If you already started, so please go on. Yeah.
I grew up with Eduardo the document we are presenting. I don't know if I start right now the doc. Okay, or I don't know if you're going to.
Let us. By the way, let I introduce you both, and then you will probably have a chance to decide with technical issues and provide the presentation. And our first speakers are Eduardo Torres Alonso and Andrea Samaniego Sanchez, if I'm not mistaken with the names. Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. The COVID-19 emergency and the responses of different nation states were a leviathan of the 21st century, and this is a question. So it's a title of the report, and please. Now you may use all equipment you need, and floor is yours. You have something around 15 minutes, and maybe a few minutes for emerge just 1-2 questions. We will see how many we will manage to, how many time we will manage to give for questions answers. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our members of the this event, this international symposium. We wrote this paper called The Emergency of COVID-19 and the State's Responses, and I will start. The sanitary emergency caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus, which produces the disease known as COVID-19, has provoked an unusual global quarantine state. This circumstance led to the emergency of a sanitary leviathan that at the same time set the proper measurement to avoid the disease spread, particularly reclusion at home, install a surveillance system for people. Never before, as nowadays, a majority of the world's population is attached to controls and tracking by the authority. At the same time, the public health crisis has caused severe questioning about structural adjustment policies that have affected, among other things, countries' health system. From a minimal state at this time to the exaltation of the presence of the state as the great protector of citizenship, it has gone through. This apparent protection has been noticed through many measures that have included border closure as a source of sovereignty, reinforcement, and pointing out the other, usually a foreigner, as the responsible of the contagious. However, migrations before and during the pandemic reflect conflicts, scarcity, and persecutions. Governments face the major challenge of providing temporal support conditions for those migrant people until the sanitary emergencies finish, because its agglomeration represents a significant infection risk. It is lamentable to realize that not only among migrant people, but generally in a society, health is a class privilege. Overcrowding, malnutrition, the necessity of getting out of work or to escape from their origin places due to prevailing conditions there are incoming gates for the virus that have turned upside down global institutions. In addition, it seems at the horizon quite fragile, the return of a social state due to governments have assigned millions of dollars to unemployment people and health services. The numbers change, but the objective is the same. Do not leave the population to their fates. In the era of the great pestilence, as King says, where some are more equal than others, the fear makes that the ones who have more resources hoard more supplies and medicines. On one side, confinement as a first measure to avoid contagion is viable in those places where are minimum well-being conditions. The home spaces is adequate, there are access to quality public services, and there is a Wi-Fi connection also. On the other side, is not the same in economical vulnerable zones where its inhabitants have to go out to work and to get income to eat. The inequality gap that has always been there has become more evident. However, in the middle layers of society, the confinement has brought negative sequels, precisely because no one was prepared to transform their routines in such a dramatic way. In the best of cases, or find themselves in an unemployment situation due to the closure of business and companies of diverse scale from one day to another. This led to a precarious situation where their saving funds run out in the case they exist. But governments are not only concerned about health crisis, but social and political too. Democracy in context deals with higher uncertainty is a serious enemy. Populism, as Rosambayon, Vallespín, Bacusñán, and Mueller said, an enemy that offers fast, new, and effective solutions to problems, although democracy do it too, it solves problems, seeks to innovate in the way in which those involved try to provide an answer which benefits the greatest numbers of people. That is, that it has a low cost and its duration is on a long time. But in contrast to populist solutions, this being from the right to the left democracy has a different rhythm, a slower one, because the design of a solution in democratic language implies dialogue, concentration, discussion, and finally, agreement. Is this a problem? In restless moments where citizenship feels threatened, yes. But at the same time, while democratic deliberation wants to protect citizens' interests, guarding their rights and freedom, in democracy, the citizens could judge at the ballot box the management done by the authorities from a health crisis. But in an authoritarian system, this possibility is closed. Moreover, public dissent does not exist. The different measures that different governments have taken around the world to face COVID disease have produced the existence of risk for free exercise of freedoms. In this way, power surveillance and its dictations become an indispensable requirement so that the day after democracy maintains itself as the governing form and will not be supplanted by despotic or autocratic governors. An example of this is the interest and not proper manners that Viktor Orban and Narendra Modi in Hungary and India, respectively, have used the pandemic situation to assume faculties where powers limited self-power and citizenship could have the certainty of these freedoms that are not in risk. In addition to health personnel, there are computers and big data specialists who have been facing the pandemic. The virus has shown fear in the citizen, and to protect himself, he gave more freedom to the state and accepted restrictions on his rights. Maintaining video surveillance after an emergency is a temptation for many rulers. The use of technology seems to be shaping social behavior. For example, China has introduced a social score system. It was said before the pandemic. It allows a deep evaluation of citizens. If someone crosses a red light, for instance, they lost points and could receive sanctions according to their score. The digital panopticon has ceased to be a theory to become a reality. It could be said that closed authoritarian political systems have faced a better way in the pandemic. It's not an easy answer. It is true that in those societies, social discipline is stronger for cultural and political philosophical reasons, would say. But in open societies, the democratic ones, it has been registered less since there is a greater circulation of information, according to The Economist. Technology changes related to work, fun, consumption, and education that have been occurring during these months have been given in advance, but the confinement accelerated them. Diverse product delivery platforms, TV on demand, and remote learning have increased their value on the market, and at the same time, they have obtained more data from citizen clients. Here's a new element that government have to consider: the regulation of the uses of personal data made by privates. Privacy is a condition of contemporary democracy. If this were an additional concern, another topic is linked to the IT security of strategic facilities. Cyber attacks on official institutions have happened, and hackers have kidnapped computer networks, and they have requested money to develop them. Hospitals are in danger of suffering this kind of attacks, but some groups dedicated to these things of activities have pointed out that hospital infrastructure will not be the objective of kidnapping, and that if their systems are encrypted, it will be a mistake, giving their autonomy back immediately and for free. I will resume. Challenge and problems that appear during the pandemic are beyond the capacity of governments, even, of course, for those democrats who have requested safe conducts for their citizens to go and buy at the drugstore or to the grocery store. And they have authorized to civil and military security institutions the imposition of fines or the detention of those who infringe the behavior and confinement rules. This is the suppression of it. Although the future is a guess, the truth is that the strict confinement will be gradually lifted, and little by little, the activities that will imply a reconstruction of the social, economic, and family ties damaged by the pandemic will be resumed. The institutions, managers of the conflict must return to democratic normality, making decrees of the states of exemption lose force and returning the powers to each power, deconcentrating them and lifting the restrictions of freedoms. The danger itself does not lie in the entry into force of states of exemption or emergency while all powers work normally. The risk is when the state is normalized and the public powers, except from the executive, are not in operation. From the great political declaration, one must pass to the bureaucratic operation, that is, to the operation of the nuts, bolts, and gears of the great machinery of the public administration that makes possible a reconstruction of the public and the new pact in which the state assumes the role, another central wall, in the social direction without this means embracing statism. On the other hand, the big brother that appear with the technological surveillance must be restricted. The cyber police that watches over everyone and everything for the sake of public health has to return to its task, and when there is opportunity, governments with the participation of society must review the actions of the technological police during confinement and accordingly be the case, punish human rights abuses. It has been found that the virtual and the technological are not dimensions of other than the human one. If society could continue, not without difficulties, of course, it was thanks to the internet and computers, telephones, and tablets. Therefore, a fundamental discussion in the new reality, internalized in the language, will be to make effective the right to be forgotten on the network and the right to connect. The first is to protect the honor and personal data of a person, and the other is to reduce the digital divisions and inequalities that arise from it. Having the internet is the cause and consequence of a stratified society built on keys of inequalities and exclusions. A stronger and more social state is required to face the fears of Hobbesian state, provide certainty to the population, and face the cost of making decisions. In the face of a threat the size of COVID-19, democracies, perform better against authoritarian governments, although they did so faster. This is interesting to the extent that fear spread, immediate response were required. However, despite this delay, the responses of democracy were more efficient. Since there are freedoms and elections, the rulers cannot fail. Populist leaders have shown that their institutions are weak in the face of problems of this magnitude. Thank you very much.
Okay, seems my sound is coming back. Thank you very much, Andrea. And I understood that Eduardo have no chance at the moment to say something orally. Actually, Eduardo, I would just like to add, if you can hear us at least, you may use the chat if you have something to add to the presentation given by Andrea. And maybe also you will want to take part in the answering the question, but I think
I'm sorry, Tatiana. Let me welcoming the Professor Bruno Conder Comparato from University of São Paulo.
I'm going to announce, yeah.
Okay, because now I can see Professor on the list of panelists. Okay.
He's
welcome.
Okay. He is.
Thank you for joining the session.
Okay, and I think that I suggest that we will follow the previous session way of working, presentation, then questions probably, and then discussants time for some kind of response, or shall we wait with the or skip some kind of questions for the rest of our discussion for common?
Or maybe we'll ask Professor Comparato which solution is better for him on the end of this panel or after the choice is yours.
Dear Professor, what is more comfortable for you? How is more comfortable for you to give us some kind of remarks, replies, comments before questions, or can you hear? It's looking like
yes.
Here.
Yes, we hear. Well, I hear. I don't know if all the participants agree with me that maybe at the end of the session, if there are questions, because the topics are similar, maybe if we all if all my colleagues participate, maybe our doubts or the doubts that have the others can be resumed or can be answered with the expositions or the
maybe
talks of everybody.
Yeah, maybe it's a good suggestion, but I'm a little bit wonder what is happening with my technical equipment, because my second laptop from which I was going to follow the papers and titles of universities is actually stopped working at the moment, and I'm a little bit frustrated that some of our participants are not able to communicate properly. Dear Professor Bruno Conder Comparato, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Professor Bruno. You don't have
your microphone.
Audio.
Yeah, maybe you may. I even can't see. Let me try to write him.
Yes, because it doesn't show next to your name, Professor Bruno, the icon of a microphone.
Problems with the typing as well. Looking like he's not able. Yeah. Sorry if I make mistakes with the typing, because I have some troubles with key.
It seems that we have technical problems, so maybe we'll jump to the next presentation.
Let we do like this, at least for this first presentations, and maybe we will come back to speakers after these technical issues will be fixed. In this way, I have to announce the next speaker, and it is going to be Radoslav Fiedler, Amul Poznan, Poland, and the title of the report is "Why did the United States fail to respond to COVID-19?" This is a question as well. So, please.
Hello, thank you very much. Can you hear me? It's working. Okay, I'm very happy. Thank you for inviting me on that event. Very important and update question on the problem of COVID-19 and new variants, never-ending pandemic, very exhausting, and we are exhausted and really under stress psychologically, and not only global economy disruptions and poor response of several governments. I would like to focus on U.S. policy, U.S. response to COVID-19 from March up to May 2020, and with some also remarks on the current situation and what should be done, what should be improved, and also from a U.S. national level and global level. I know it's ambitious to grasp that situation. I don't know. It's now it's visible with the screen. My screen to you is working. Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Fine.
Yes, we can see it. Please, yeah, please go on.
One moment. Let's start. Okay, it's in USA was the world's epicenter of COVID-19 in March-May 2020. I had misluck to be there, to be in New York City when it was a panic and the problems, and the people were and the local government was not well prepared in that situation. I remember it, and from it was my personal, but I experience, but I also try to understand what happened, what did happen that time. And it's a problem with multiple systems failures in USA, because USA as a relatively well advanced country with a vibrant democracy, with knowledgeable people, and government, think tanks, and the environment, policy making, poorly responded to COVID-19 pandemic. It's really, it was really unimpressive and very poor response, even a catastrophe, can say. To analyze response in polarized politics, difficult, long-lasting pandemic, and what should be done. I know this time is very quickly passing, so I would like to focus on to respond why U.S. was ill-prepared for crisis, because of a weak health status and weak system of social protection. Unfortunately, compared to Germany, Japan, and other from the EU countries, a lower life expectancy, low level of health insurance coverage, few hospital beds relatively to population. For example, in Japan, it's 13 beds, in US, 3 beds per 1,000 inhabitants. It's not well organized for the average citizen. Related to high level of inequality, absence of public provisions of healthcare. COVID-19 is not an equal killer because the victims, it inflicted pain for people of color. Latins, African Americans, Latino, and others. More resilient was Asian American population amid the COVID-19 pandemic in early stage. And the Trump administration had cut funding to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it was Obama's decision, the predecessor, and Trump and his administration and his advisors ignored it, and they changed the policy, changed the patterns, just several months, 6 months, 7 months before outbreak. And so it was very bad miscalculation. I don't want to, in detail, to answer about this system, American system, big corporations and inequalities, people of color, racial situation, and also you can see Japan, 13 beds for it's one of indicated pre-pandemic situation has 13 beds per 1,000 people, while the United States has fewer than 3 beds per 1,000. So it's really, for example, in New York City was very well prepared, I mean hospital beds, but it was a terrible shock for the health system in March, in April, and people, and the system was surpassed by pandemic. It's not equal danger, it's not equal killer. We can see that the minorities and the different colored people, they were exposed because of the situation, the essential workers, bad situation, I mean the sanitary situation, food situation, salary situation, the health condition, weak health, multiple reasons. We don't have time enough to detailedly to analyze that issue, but it's really we can say that the COVID-19 in the case of the United States was not an equal killer, not an equal danger. For example, whites from New York City, they emigrated to summer houses to go away, and remote work, remote office, online office at home, in security environment. And the people who were left behind on the first line, they had a not good situation, health situation, not good insurances, or something, shortage of insurances, health insurances, and many problems. And
I'm sorry, Radek, because we can see now your first slide. I don't know, this is your intention or not?
No. Sorry, maybe I just start.
To list them. But anyway, you are just talking quite understandable. So.
Okay, but I try to again, maybe.
I just thought it maybe it was.
I will start again. I'm sorry.
Part of the idea, just to stay on the first slide. Sometimes it's happening.
Okay. Okay. So it's
yeah. Yes.
This one and this one, it's complex federal system. Also, we need to analyze that situation, because it's 57 jurisdictions in the United States, multi-level decision makers, and sometimes it's different policies in some states. More health and mask mandatory wearing, and sometimes not. it's very complicated. It's not just a federal government, but it's 57 jurisdictions, and it's really sometimes the governors ignored the threat and opened economies earlier, lifted lockdowns earlier, and provoked new waves due to the not well prepared decision making. Okay, and it is a delayed response in case of USA, and several measures were taken, but it were delayed and too slow and too weak in doing it. Delayed, for example, it's important to see that Trump had information about he had information about the threat of COVID-19 pandemic. He had information much earlier in January. It's a threat for his presidency and for the administration. It's a great threat for health security, and he should respond. He ignored these informations from advisors and experts, and he ignored, and it was 2 months delay in response, because 2 months in case of pandemic is not good situation, because it was going through United States from the east, from the west shore. So it's a really devastating effect. In that situation, you can see in March 17th, it was too late. Trump knew about pandemic threat 2 months earlier, personally. And you can see the cases and the numbers. And Trump in February, for example, in the end of February, told the audience that the pandemic is under control. Everything's correct, and all cases is was under control at the time. It was such his. And you can see different. First wave was in New York, but it was under control of mayor and governor, and all the system has started finally working, and the rest, and you can see the several waves, and New York, the worst wave was behind in July in New York, July 2020. And this political polarization, I want to say that it's the pandemic started to be a case for a competition, for a political game, for misinformation. It was election year in that time in 2020. And you can see that President Trump was warned by advisors in January 28th. He was warned earlier, but very he admitted it later that he was warned earlier with an interview with Bob Woodward. His book was released last year, and so he even openly admitted about his misconduct. And you can see some. This time passed and nothing was done really impressive in the crucial time between January and March 2020. And now, what is gonna now? About 60% Americans vaccinated. It's 200 million people vaccinated in the United States.
Sound is missing again. Sorry, Radoslav, sorry for interrupting. Your sound is just...
Okay, it's vaccinated people, 60%, 200 million Americans. And it's not, we can say it's impressive, but it's not enough. still 40% is not vaccinated. And I remember Biden's plan to vaccinate people up to June 2021, 200 million. So he managed it. He managed achieved that goal in December. So 6 months later. And you can see, unfortunately, the pandemic is still the problem from everyday life of America. In America, it's still numbers increasing, sometimes decreasing, but it's unfortunately it's not under control. It's not. Still, it's a threat for public health. As new variant is coming, has been already noticed in several cases. I mean, Omicron variant in the United States. So it's a real problem, and the deaths is more than deaths than Civil War and the Second World War, First World War, Vietnam War, Korean War, and is unfortunately now is more 1,000 deaths per day in United States. I know in Poland is a more ugly situation in the numbers, but it's Biden promised that he would control the government, a scientific approach, and education and the measures, and we can see that it's beyond the political divisions. It's a problem. Bipartisan politics in the United States problem is not stopped. Still is a problem. We can say that the crisis revealed multiple market failures and government failures in the United States. It is, we can say, this linked to long-standing disintegrate collective action and the role of science. Unfortunately, conspiracy theories in American politics and some real criticism of mandatory mask wearing. A lot of problems in this. We don't have time in analyzing, but I think it's similar in many other cases, in many other countries. The crisis also revealed the weakness of society, massive inequalities in income, wealth, health. Many of frontline workers, most essential, were both lowest paid and most exposed. Still, it's still, I mean, from March, May, but it's still important to see that such situation is continuing. And what should be done? Is some recommendation. Should be clearly defined lines of responsibilities and authority between the various levels of government during the health crisis. And the leadership of public health organization tasked to respond to future public health threats should be able to operate free from political interference. I know it's idealistic approach. It is very idealistic outlook. We can say that it should be federal government improved respond. It should be local government improved respond, coordination, cooperation, not competition, and also science, science education. Funds should be put on the table. The investments from public health system, and also a global response. US is responsible partly for a global vaccination program. And unfortunately, even if the US would control finally pandemic, it should close the borders, because in pandemics in other countries, in other parts of the world. So it should be the common effort for a global vaccination program. It's, for example, the third world is 6-7% of vaccination. I mean, the poorest countries, more or less statistic. US is 60%. So, you know, it's really a challenge to vaccinate the globally and to educate people to take vaccines. It's also, it should be EU, US and China share responsibility. I mean, the countries, global players, India and other, Brazil, to be involved in that regard, in that common task, and cooperation and coordination at many levels. It's idealistic. Unfortunately, the world is much more ugly. It's not bad shape, unfortunately. Serious threats after this 2 years pandemia is a populism and democracy retreat, rising US-China tensions, disruptions in supply chains, inflation, disruption in global economy. And we still don't know, because it's a recovery is very fragile, under stress, under strain. It's high inflation, not only in Poland, but also in the United States, in EU, Germany, in Turkey, particularly very high inflation, and new COVID variants and global inequalities in vaccinations. So, looking for American experiment, I think it's much better situation now than 1.5 years ago. But it's still a huge task to rebuild capacity, to restore confidence. Government is still strained, it's still under question. And remember, in 2022, there will be midterm elections in the United States. Probably Trump's Republican Party will take the Congress. And Biden's administration will lose an important instrument for reforming the country. I want to say that it's also some positive measures have been taken. Mammoth programs, infrastructure. Now is negotiated great funds of public society, social funds and social reforms, $1.75 trillion is under discussion now in Congress with Biden's administration. When it probably before Christmas, it should be passed through Congress, and I think that after the great funds, the public health would improve in the United States, but it should take several years and transparent effort, transparent streams of funds, and really a very important task to do for local government, state government, and the federal government to attain that goal. However, populism is knocking to American politics, and probably would come back Trump and his team in 2024 as a really is looming threat of American politics. I know this time is very limited. Thank you, and sorry for such a not really detailed, but I wanted to make a jump from the many issues to analyze that topic. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Radoslav. Actually, you just caught my thoughts because I was already going to write you for how many minutes else would you like to to use. Anyway, we discussed here in chat and decide with Professor Bruno Kondor Comparato that we will organize now our discussion, as it already started in this way. We will organize our discussion for how many time will be left, at least, yeah. But after all speakers will have a chance to just present their reports. So it means that I have to announce the next speaker, and it is going to be Monika Urbaniak, Poznan University of Medical Sciences, Poland, and the title of the topic of her speech is the constitutional obligation of combating epidemic illnesses of the public authorities, the case of Poland. And I'm really asking all of speakers just to try to keep the reglement, try to keep as much as it possible, because I think that all of us actually have desire to also to communicate, to discuss, and to ask questions, because reports are really interesting and very important for general discussion, I think. Yeah. So Monika, Professor Monika, please.
Okay, I will. I will. Thank you very much for invitation, and I'm going to cut my story short. I want to talk about the constitutional obligation of public authorities in Poland, which are obligated to combat epidemic illnesses. We have the Polish Constitution, which was adopted in 1987. And the Article 68 stipulates that everyone has the right to have his or her health protected, and it goes together. This regulations goes together with the obligation of public authorities to combat epidemic illnesses. And it was, it's quite an old regulation, but it wasn't that much used as right now. Because in Poland, the pandemic started in March. It was the first case appeared on 4th of March 2020, and all the problems, the epidemic began, and the constitutional protection. It is not only a protection of an individual, but it has to be understood as the right to a public health. So we understand it. We have to understand it as not only as the right of every individual, but it is understood as a protection of collective rights. And right now we have some conflicts concerning constitutional values. From one side, we have the freedom of a person. So we have the Article 31 of the Constitution, which stipulates the regulation that everyone has the right to receive legal protection. On the other side, we have the obligation of public authorities to combat epidemic illnesses. And of course, the specificity of combating the infections, and is limiting the freedoms, because you cannot combat the illness without limiting the freedoms, like the isolation, quarantine, the freedom of association. In Poland we had some, not only in Poland, some of businesses were closed, that we couldn't perform any action. So I mean, we have the first thing to answer is whether the epidemic diseases are the same as infectious diseases, because the protection on the constitutional level is a protection against epidemic diseases. So the term is used by the Constitution, but it is, according to me, it is a broader term than infectious diseases, because among epidemic diseases we can have different other other different diseases which are epidemics, but they are not infectious, like obesity, lung cancer, or strokes. Yeah, there are many other diseases which could be epidemic and could be called epidemic. So there is the Act of 5th of December 2008. It's quite an old act concerning the procedure, how to prevent and combat the infections and these diseases in humans. And there is no legal definition of epidemic. So epidemic diseases, there's only the definition of an epidemic, which is understood as occurrence of many of infections that are in a greater number than they used to be before, or the infections they were not before, they were not seen before. Yeah, like the COVID infection. So the Constitution imposes on public authorities to combat the epidemic illnesses, but the Constitution, neither the Constitution nor the normal acts, they don't explain what it means. What are the epidemic diseases? Yeah, there's only the definition of an epidemic, so we have to use it to trying to understand what the authorities should do. And the legal basis of the state of epidemic was the regulation of the Minister of Health, which was issued just a few 2 weeks after the first case was diagnosed on 4th of May. So it was a regulation of the Minister of Health. It was not an act which was issued by the Parliament. So the state of epidemic, first of all, is not provided in the Constitution, and neither the Constitution nor the regulation of the Minister of Health doesn't constitute a legal basis for restricting human rights during COVID pandemic, because we could use the regulation concerning the Act on the State of Natural Disaster, that according to that act, the government would have the power to limit the protection of some fundamental rights and freedoms. And this event of spreading the disease of COVID could be classified as the state of natural disaster. And in this act, according to this act, there would be the possibility to introduce some restrictions on human rights and freedoms in the state of natural disaster, but the government didn't decide to introduce this kind of state. And so, as I told, the Council of Ministers hasn't decided to declare the state of natural disaster, because, as I told you, it could help us to limit the freedoms according to law. And there are some. I don't know how. I still have 5 minutes, so I will try to shorten my because I'm looking at you and I know I have to finish. But the legal basis is Article 31 of the Constitution. So there's the regulation is that the freedom of the person should be protected by the law. So the freedom of the person shall receive legal protection. That's a rule. Yeah? And the other rule is that everyone shall respect the freedoms and the rights of the others. And so the main thing is that these are the obligations of the Constitution guarantee human rights and the core elements of the rule of law. So the limitations, according to the Article 31, can be imposed only, first of all, by the statute, not by the regulation normally of the government, for example, and they can be imposed only when it is necessary in a democratic state for the protection of certain values, which are indicated here. You can have a look at it. but I underline it in red, that these kind of limitations, they shall not violate the essence of freedoms and rights. So these restrictions, according to Article 31, that I was talking about, the main thing that they shall not violate the essence of freedoms and rights. And we have the other, on the other hand, we could have used the other regulation, which is Article 233, that stipulates the states of emergency, and they introduced the catalog of rights and freedoms that cannot be restricted in such a state, like, for example, the dignity of a person, protection of life, and so on. But the Constitution says nothing about the possibility to not violating the essence of freedoms and rights. So there's nothing in the Constitution. So if the government had decided to use the other way, like to use the Article 233, the restrictions would be imposed legally, because the state, according to the Constitution, we have the three extraordinary measures: the martial law, a state of emergency, and a state of natural disaster. And the pandemic of COVID could be understood as the natural catastrophe. Yeah, so it could be the explanation for the state of natural disaster. And those are, I'm heading to the end. So the regulations that were used, of course, they were, the government issues the regulations, like five a week, because the situation was changing, and they were, of course, issued in an epidemic emergency. But that means that the state of natural disaster was introduced in a material terms. The state wasn't introduced by the statute, and hasn't been proclaimed, but we have to try to ask the question whether was it constitutional order of fundamental rights and freedom was violated, because we have the Article 92. I won't read it, you can have a look at it. So it stipulates that all the regulations has to be issued on the basis of special authorization. So there was no special authorization for a specific organ, because there was no the state of natural catastrophe wasn't introduced. So of course there were many restrictions. They limited human rights and freedoms. For example, as I told you a few minutes before, shutting down selected businesses, like, I don't know whether you had it in your country, but for example, we had a ban to go to the woods. I don't know why. I mean, most of the bans and orders were justified, because the government wanted to stop spreading the illness. But some of the restrictions not only limited the rights and freedoms, but they also led to the violation of the essence, or even the suspension of human rights and freedoms. Yeah. So these restrictions, which were really far-reaching, and they could have been introduced during the period of introduction of some extraordinary measures, which were not undertaken by the government. So thank you for your attendance. I hope I finished up in 15 minutes, and I'm waiting for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I will try to stop. Just a moment. I have to. I use Zoom really rarely. Just a moment. I have to stop sharing the. Did I stop? I hope so.
I think it's the last slide here. Thank you for.
Just a moment. I will try to try to do
You want
it.
to go? You want to provide the space for another presentation.
Just a moment. I know
Okay.
I'm
Yes.
quite in a stress because I don't know how to do it. Just give me a while.
Okay. I think you have. Actually, I'm not sure who is actually managing this conference, but I think usually it's just has a special bottom on the top. Yeah. I think you managed to do it. Okay, following our agreed schedule and way of working today, I'm just giving the floor for Tomasz Litwin,
Thank you.
University in
Ignatianum, Jesuit University Ignatianum.
Yeah, letters a little bit Ignatium, yeah, in Krakow. Actually, I just want to say that I had been in Krakow and was very impressed by the beauty of the city. And it is also Poland. And the title of the speech is Would obligatory vaccination for COVID-19 be acceptable for the human rights perspective? And Tomasz also having a question mark in the so is also questioning. So Tomasz, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much.
15 minutes.
Of course. So I would like to thank organizers for inviting me. I also would like to thank the chair for introducing me. Therefore, I'll start the presentation. Okay. So what we know about the COVID-19 disease? Well, it's a very serious and infectious disease. More than 5 million people died worldwide. Many others who are formally regarded as cured are suffering from long-term effects of this disease. Because of this disease and pandemic, the governments were forced to introduce the lockdowns that, as it was previously taught, led to the limitations or even to the violation of rights and freedoms. And also these lockdowns worsened the economic situation of states, but also of the individuals. The COVID-19 pandemic also caused very difficult situation in health sector, as the health sector nowadays must focus on the medical treatment of the victims of the described disease, and the patients who required the medical treatment, appropriate medical treatment for other social diseases, like for example cancer, they don't receive it because the health sector is focused on the fighting with the COVID-19 disease. So for such people who are suffering from the other but very serious diseases, social diseases, such situation could be when they don't receive the right medical treatment at the right time, could be regarded as death sentence. And however, today we have the effective weapon against the COVID-19. it's the vaccines. These are vaccines, and the vaccines are the only scientific confirmed effective method of fighting with the disease. The vaccines protects from serious effects of disease. They also limit the possibility of being infected. As well, they limit the possibility that the infected person, however, which is vaccinated, will spread the infection on the others. What is very important that COVID-19 vaccines are easily accessible in many Western states. Generally, they for free. However, as it was previously mentioned in United States, but also in Poland and in many other Western countries, there is insufficient number of vaccinated persons to create population immunity. Therefore, it seems that voluntary model of vaccination exhausted its possibilities. And now, to encourage more people, we need to introduce the obligatory vaccination against COVID-19. I regard the obligatory model of vaccination broadly. I regard it as the restrictions concerning the not vaccinated persons, which don't concern the persons who are vaccinated. And such restrictions were introduced. For example, fees for not vaccinated persons, which are introduced in Indonesia, and there is a plan to introduce such fees in Austria. Dismissal from work of not vaccinated person, it concerns the federal employees in USA. The prohibition of entrance of not vaccinated persons to the public places. Such solutions were introduced in, for example, in France and Denmark. Obligatory payment for hospitalization because of the COVID-19 for not vaccinated persons. Such original solution is introduced in Singapore. And I am the supporter of the first and deferred solution, as we should remember that obligatory vaccination should protect the public health, and it is the main purpose of this model, and not the model of the oppression of not vaccinated persons. However, in public debate, there are arguments from the human rights perspective against the obligatory vaccination. They are quite serious, however, they all seem to be wrong. First of all, vaccination on against COVID-19 is not a medical experiment. All the stages of the research concerning the vaccines are finished. Also, the vaccines were allowed to use by the special regulatory offices that are controlling the medical products in the, for example, in the European Union, but also in the United States. Last but not least, it is over a year and a half that the first dose of the vaccine was given during the research stage, and there is no report, no scientific report about any serious harmful effect of the vaccines that would endanger the population. So I don't find this argument right. Obligatory vaccination is also not against the freedom of religion, as there was a case of Dawes versus Miles before the Supreme Court, where the applicants stated that the vaccines were made from the cells of the aborted fetuses. It's not true, because the most popular two most popular vaccines, Pfizer, produced by Pfizer and Moderna, were produced not using the human cells. And the last argument against the obligatory COVID-19 vaccination also is not right, because first of all, we cannot regard the vaccination as a violation of dignity, as it is not very painful. It is also have no harmful effects on our health, on our body. I also don't agree that it could be against the freedom of thought and conscience, as the enemies, opponents of the vaccination, still could state that they are against vaccination, and they were forced to vaccinate by the government, or that they were forced by the government, and they could comply to the court that they were illegally forced to being vaccinated. I can agree that obligatory vaccination could be regarded as the limitation of personal freedom connected with the right to protect private life and freedom of thought, regarded as the autonomy of the individual to decide if I am vaccinated or no, what I am doing with my body and my health. However, such limitation, in my opinion, is justified by the protection of public health associated with the protection of the life and health of others, especially those who cannot be vaccinated because of their health and medical reasons. Therefore, I would like to finish my presentation with an appeal to all the audience. Please vaccinate yourself. Please encourage to vaccination all your relatives. and please vaccinate your children. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for presentation, Tomasz, and for kind of advertisement of taking care of own and ours health. I can understand it very very clear, because, you know, of course, health is one of the most important for humans' lives, not only humans on our planet, at least. And at least, but not at last, but not least, I would like to provide the floor for great pleasure for Jerzy Skripczak.
I tutaj to, tak?
Is happening.
Okay, can you see my presentation? Oh.
We are talking it in a parallel. Once again, Jerzy Skripczak and Tomasz Maksymuk from Tomasz is from the Adam Mickiewicz University, Amu, Poznan, Poland, and Tomasz is coming from Poznan University of Medical Sciences, Poland, and actually the title of the speech is sounds like referring doctors to fight the epidemic during the COVID-19 pandemic, between forces, labor, and necessity fight against the epidemic. And here is no question mark, here's this kind of statement. And with great pleasure, I'm giving the floor for
okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for introducing us. However, maybe I can introduce my colleague, Tomasz Maksymuk, who is also with us, I hope. And Tomasz is from Poznan University of Medical Science. He is medical doctor, and we thought that of course, when we analyzing the right to health or healthcare, maybe we should also focus on rights of doctors, or maybe we should ask also about human rights of doctors. I know that yesterday, Medical Chambers has started the new campaign in media called I am a doctor, I'm a human being. So question about doctors' rights, and because doctors, of course, are of medical staff, are part of healthcare system. So doctors or physicians and other medical staff form, of course, an essential part of an effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They have critical roles in diagnosis and their commitment to treating, despite increased personal risks, in essential for successful public health response in containing the pandemic. With respect to moral theory, numerous reasons have been offered for the view that doctors have a duty to treat or an obligation to provide care to patients. Frontline medical workers, doctors, have been experiencing high workload, personal risk, and societal pressure to meet extraordinary demands in healthcare. Despite this, traditional public health ethics has paid little attention to the protection of the rights of doctors. This is our opinion, of course. Although this question are equally important to all healthcare professionals, however, we will focus on physicians. One reason is that Tomek is a medical doctor. Very shortly, historical background. The obligation to assist and act for the patient's benefit has always formed the foundation of the ethos of medicine and its practitioners. As epidemics, plagues, pestilential air have always occurred, the knowledge and care of physicians in fighting them has been the principal element in the combat against disease since antiquity, especially in the case of mass disease. Hence, probably the belief in the supernatural origin of medical knowledge, which, for example, was confirmed by the myth that it had been the Roman god Asclepius who was to protect the center and capital of the then world from the plague in 293 before Christ. It is also no coincidence that the doctors were descendant from the state of priests, but allowing such secret knowledge was connected from the very beginning with the obligation to assist. Research questions, which in our opinion are very attractive, is, however, fundamental doubts arises, namely whether such involvement of medics in the fight against the epidemic should only be recognized and analyzed in terms of deontological obligations or in the form of appropriate legal norms being, in fact, work, order, or even forced labor. And if so, should it happen in any situation, even when the employing entity does not provide personal protective equipment, putting medical workers in the face of a threat to their health or even life? The unprecedented magnitude of COVID-19 pandemic has led most health systems to overburden or even to the brink of incapacity. This was the case both during the first two waves of the pandemic in 2020 and in the next waves in 2021, including in Italy, France, Spain, and also in Poland. This situation resulted not only from the scale and increase in infection and the shortage of specialist equipment and rooms, despite temporary hospitals being established in many locations around the world, but mainly from the shortages of medical staff and personnel. While many countries coped quite efficiently with the deficit in the material sphere of the fight against this phenomenon, there were more issues with ensuring the appropriate level of medical staff. This was due to various factors. Indeed, the most serious were the numerous cases of infections, which sometimes even resulted in the death of medical staff and personnel, despite the use of personal protective equipment. According to the Amnesty International data, as of 13 July 2020, more than 3,000 medical workers worldwide died to the first wave of the infection. The number of deaths in this professional group after the second wave of September 3rd, 2020 was already estimated at even 7,000 persons. You can see on this slide data from Polish Ministry of Health, and so it seems that more than 84,000 medical workers became infected with SARS-CoV-2, and 145 of them died from COVID-19. You can see in every category this data. So let's go further. Shortages in medical staffing and the resignation of personnel from work in such conditions sometimes resulted from fear and lack of appropriate knowledge in this area, even among medical staff. Extraordinary actions in the frontline conditions resulted in burnout syndrome in numerous cases. Finally, in a number of countries, many years of neglect in healthcare investment resulted in deficits of or worrying trends in these occupational groups already before the pandemic. For example, the average age over 60 and sudden waves of hospitalization in such cases drastically exposed these deficiencies, resulting in the dramatic consequences to the quality of medical care. Radek mentioned the case of US. However, we would like to focus on other aspects of this pandemic. Specific solutions were adopted already during this pandemic in US. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which entered into force on 18 March 2020, allowed employees to be released from work for 12 weeks as a part of extension of the Family and Medical Leave Act, for example, in the case of ordered quarantine. In addition, this act provides that an employer may exclude employees who are medical workers or emergency responders from protection under this law. Under this arrangement, doctors, nurses, and paramedics could lose their job if they did not turn up despite the risk, in line with the provisions of the Comprehensive Pandemic Response Package. The decision to maximize the number of healthcare workers treating patients by possibly excluding them from quarantine and sick leave may have been made as hospitals expected more waves of patients. In the US, other solutions were also introduced, which could make it difficult for medics to take up work in light of local regulations. For example, it was possible to waive non-compensation clauses would allow the physician to continue the practice in the immediate vicinity of the employer. In the US, on the other hand, it is noted that the pandemic is causing many doctors to retire early due to the personal health issues. It is stressed that such a trend is particularly acute in primary medical care, which is already struggling with a shortage of physicians. It is recognized that many US medical entities put pressure on medical staff to personnel to keep working, even if they have had COVID. In Canada, amid an exponential increase in the number of hospitalizations of patients with COVID-19, leading to fears of severely overloading the overall healthcare system, some provinces have started to turn to recently retired doctors and nurses to return to work. And it must be admitted that such appeals received a comprehensive and positive response. However, it was only a request. So in UK, under the pre-pandemic law, medical employers could cancel booked annual leaves. However, it was decided to introduce additional temporary statutory provisions under which employees who were unable to exercise their entitlement to annual leave due to COVID-19 might transfer up to 20 days of accrued annual leave for a period of 2 years. All NHS employers have used this option. On the other hand, it was emphasized that no physician should feel forced to undertake duties that he or she did not feel competent to perform. In addition, the UK government has published national guidelines on COVID-19 and pregnant female workers, for example. It is said that, for example, women of any kind should not be obliged to continue working unless a risk assessment support this. The pandemic's start, the General Medical Council issued guidelines explaining how it intends to regulate the practice during the coronavirus outbreak. And you can see here the answer for this situation in Belgium. Like in other European countries, the situation has been so dramatic with the surge in cases and hospital admissions that, for example, doctors from the Belgian city of Liège have been asked to continue their work even if they have the coronavirus. In Italy, Similarly, the surge in infection has forced most hospitals in Italy, especially in the northern, of course, regions, to rapidly transform their primary or secondary care facilities into dedicated COVID structures. Almost all scheduled procedures have been postponed and only emergency services have continued. This involved, for example, the need for medics to work even outside their specialization. For example, surgeons learn anew how to examine the respiratory system, and gynecologists use the non-invasive mechanical ventilation. So in practice, most countries generally assume that the physician cannot be compelled to treat a patient, and the freedom to choose doctors is protected under the law. Healthcare workers may encounter conditions they consider unsafe during a pandemic, or in such situation, refusal to work could be acceptable if the environment presents an unacceptable risk. In Poland, Professor Monika Urbaniak mentioned the Regulation Act of 5th of December 2008, and in this situation, we can find a special solution. Currently, pursuant to Article 47, paragraph 1 of this Act, the procedure of referral to work may be introduced to combat epidemics. Pursuant to this article, the subjective scope of the referral to work in combating epidemics may include employees of medical entities, persons practicing medical professions. It means that almost everyone could be asked for such work. Ask. According to the amendment from 2020, which was added to this provision, which oblige the self-governance of medical professions, for example, medical chambers and chambers of nurses, to submit at the request of the provincial governor or the Minister of Health the list of persons practicing medical services that may be assigned to work in combating epidemics. The catalog of cases and persons who are excluded from this obligation, as well as subsequent amendment to this provision, have aroused the most emotions and controversy. In the ordinary wording of this provision, the catalog of individuals excluded from this obligation list person under 18 or over 60 years of age, pregnant women or individuals bringing up children up to 18 years of age, including single parents of children under 18, persons diagnosed with partial or totally incapacity for work, invalids or individuals with diagnosed chronic disease, person referred in special acts. Shortly speaking, this is members of parliament or highest chamber of Polish parliament. Under the amendment, because during the pandemic, the government announced the amendment of this act, persons under the age of 18 and over 60 years of age were still not referred to work that carried the risk of infection while fighting an epidemic. Also, pregnant women and single parents bringing up children up to 18 years of age. On the other hand, individuals bringing up a child by both parents could use this privilege only until their offspring reached 14. The same applies to person bringing up a child with a certificate of disability or the need for special education. This catalog also includes individuals diagnosed with a partial or total incapacity for work, as well as invalids and persons with diagnosed chronic disease. This privilege was still available to individuals holding state management positions and deputies, senators of the Republic of Poland. This is, I think, a question why. Referral to work is combating, in combating an epidemic occurs by way of an administrative decision, and this is very important, that it was and it is administrative decision, which may be issued by the provincial governor or the Minister of Health. The first authority will be competent in the case of a referral to work in combating an epidemic in the province in which this person referred has his/her place of residence or is employed. The latter entity will be exclusive competence in the event of being assigned to work in another province, what is also possible. Such a decision is open to challenge, of course. The provincial governor's decision may be appealed against to the Minister of Health. However, it should be noticed that in paragraph 6 of this provision, it is stated expressly verbis that the lodging of an appeal does not suspend the execution of this decision. In the original wording of Article 47, this Act, there were no special procedure for delivering such a decision. So-called first wave of cases showed that the standard transmission of decision, for example, by registered mail with acknowledgement of receipt, is ineffective, of course, if only because post office did not function correctly during the lockdown period. In addition, some individuals were in quarantine, and for this reason, they could not meet the obligation to collect such correspondence from the post office. Hence, the amendment to this provision, which entered into force on 1st April 2020, introduced unique solution in this regard. According to the cited regulation, such correspondence may be delivered in any possible way, ensuring that the decision reaches the address, including orally, for example, by a messenger, like police or military office, by telephone. In case like this, such decision do not require justification. Decision communicated in such a way that is, other than in writing, other than delivered in writing after the reasons for such service have ceased to exist, after the pandemic, of course. The decision to refer to work in combating an epidemic creates an obligation to perform for up to 3 months even in the medical entity or another organizational unit indicated in this decision. And failure to comply with such a decision may result in imposing a fine from 5,000 zloty even to 30,000. It means it's up to 6,400 euros, which may be charged by the competent provincial governor of the Minister of Health. But such a decision also results in the creation of a number of rights for such a person, such as the right to unpaid leave at the current employer for a period specified in the decision, establishing an employment relationship with such an individual for the duration for a specific work for a period not longer than indicated in the decision, with the right to basic salary in the amount not lower than 200% of the average basic pay for a given position. Moreover, such a person was entitled to reimbursement of the cost of travel, accommodation, and meals. For the duration of the duty, the current employment relationship may not be terminated with the individual assigned to work to combat the epidemic, or the employment contract may not be terminated unless there is a basis for concluding the employment contract without notice due to the employee's fault or in the event of the change of revocation decision. According to the communication of the Ministry of Health, due to the need to protect persons assigned to work in combating epidemics, insurance policies will be perhaps for them. Summarizing, time for conclusions. It should be stated that the various sets containing deontological standards and adopted legal regulations formulate for medics an obligation to provide assistance to patients, regardless of the circumstances, in particular in epidemic situation. Different approaches of individual countries are observed in the world in ensuring strategic resources of medical staff in the fight against the epidemic. Sometimes one acts through appeals and references to ethical obligation, resorting only to this type of soft measures and persuasion. Still, in other countries, for example, in Poland, it uses hard legal instruments and state coercion. The question arises, of course, which method is more effective? So answer, based on experiences from Poland, we can say that such solution in Poland, it was completely ineffective. Why? Because, the idea to send doctors from one point to other point is completely, crazy, because we have the lack of doctors, medical staff, even in the period before pandemic. So in the case of pandemic, it means that doctors from one hospital should go to other hospitals, and there is a gap, and so this is a reason why we can answer then such a solution, such an idea is in the case of Poland ineffective, completely ineffective. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry because okay.
You shouldn't be sorry, Jerzy, because the issues we are just working with today are really, really important, and sometimes it's better to just to take much more time, as we agreed at the beginning, for reglement, and to listen to the end of this, all of these speakers. I see on my clocks on my computer that we have around 12, maybe 15 minutes for just kind of summing up or just kind of summing up remarks, and I would really pleasure to invite Professor Bruno Conder Comparato from University of São Paulo from Brazil to just to make this also to make this in kind in our today's session, and we will try to at least try to keep the timing of the schedule. Maybe if you will just take extra 5-10 minutes, it's okay, but I would really kindly ask you just to try to manage to do it in the 12 or 15 minutes. Yeah, thank you very much for all, and please, Professor, floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, at last.
Well, yeah.
Well, thank you, Tatiana, and all the participants. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I was in Poznan for the IPSA Congress it seemed ages, because it was before the pandemic, but I believe only 5 years ago, 2016. maybe, yes, yes. Well, all the presentations and the works are very interesting, and from my point of view, I'm here in Brazil, who is a special context, and I will do some remarks, my comments, who is from this perspective here from Brazil, and it's very interesting to see all these issues and how they are in some way present also in Brazil, but sometimes in a reversal mode. And I will do the remarks in the order of the presentation. So I start with Andrea and Eduardo. I can't pronounce these names because they are Brazilian names. There's a very, well, a principal question here is, we saw many books, many works and books on the problems of democracy, failure of democracy, populism, the Congress in Poznan, no, in Australia was on populism, and also we saw with the starting of at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, by July, the countries who had authoritarian regimes responded more quickly and in a more effective manner to the challenges of the pandemic than democratic countries. So this is a very interesting question. And Andrea and Eduardo, they talk about the Leviathan of the 21st century. I like this formulation because the Leviathan, Hobbes' Leviathan was against a very difficult situation, a generalized conflict. So here we have this situation also. Something must be done. This necessity is in conflict with this necessity of this authority, this Leviathan to cope with the pandemic, is in conflict with rights. So they say authoritarian regimes and open societies. But when Thomas Hobbes wrote his Leviathan, today we think, oh, it's very authoritarian, but at that time it was the best solution. The problem in politics, in political science, political theory, the problem is always the same. What is the best form of government? The answer changes. At that time, that answer was the best they could do. In the first moment, when the societies were disorganized, because no one knew what was this COVID-19, this pandemic. We didn't know how to cope with it. So the authoritarian response was the more effective at the first moment, but and now we learn much more, and the vaccination, the vaccine was possible with the conjunction of many efforts from many countries, many scientists, the scientific community. So there are very interesting points in this work. The other one is Radoslav. I don't know how to say this this name. Pardon me. Why did the US fail to respond to COVID-19? Well, US failed, and Brazil. I am speaking from Brazil, and Brazil of Bolsonaro. You know. And I like your presentation also, because our president, Trump was his idol, so he always justified his actions. Oh, in US they do this. There's an interesting point here, because when we speak of global health, if we can do a parallel with human rights, that there are no frontiers, but to implement human rights, we need civil rights that only nation states can provide. So we have issues in global health, but there is the limitation of nation states. An interesting point was the cooperation needed between countries and the national sub-levels in federal states. In Brazil, the president was against vaccination, and still is. He denied the pandemic, the disease, and more. He issued many laws, hundreds, that to force people to be in contact with the virus, for instance. Negationist laws. What happened is that at the sub-level, the subnational states level in the states, the authorities began to take actions, and he tried to bring the governors to the national court. It's a crazy thing. In Brazil, we have 600,000 deaths from COVID. We have 200 million people. It's 2.5% of the world population, but we have 12% of deaths. 600,000 people and 200,000 orphans. So all these things are are very present and cruel. Monica Urbaniak. Public authorities shall combat epidemic illnesses and protect health rights to public health. She argues on a duty to combat epidemic illnesses. And would it be a limitation to freedoms? When we talk about human rights, the first principle is the defense of life. And in an epidemic like this one, we face death. So, in my opinion, the avoiding death is preponderant, is more important than limiting freedom. It's not only the right to public health, it's the defense of life. But it's very interesting to see in the legal texts. The Constitution, says Monica, the Polish Constitution, understand, does not define epidemic disease. We have many constitutional texts that are against torture, but how to define torture? We could do a parallel here. It's very hard, very difficult to define torture, because torture has to do with pain. And this is, every individual feels pain in a different way. So it's not an easy task. And how to define epidemic disease? We are in this pandemic. There was one good thing, because the scientific community is more considered now than before. So we need the help from the scientific community. And I would say this: the essence of human rights is the defense of life. And all the interpretation of this legal text should be in this direction, because with this special pandemic, we face death. Excuse me. The next presentation is from Thomas. Would obligatory vaccination for COVID-19 be acceptable from the human rights perspective? This is a more philosophical reflection. We saw this also in Brazil, but we have here a different, a special context, because Brazil has a tradition of vaccination. So we have now 60% of the population vaccinated. And in the world, 40%. In São Paulo, the state where I live, more than 93% of the population fully vaccinated. And this happened against the president, because all the pharmaceutical companies, all the vaccine producers wanted to test the vaccines here in Brazil, because we are a great, huge country with a a huge population, and is separated in many areas. We have a capacity to produce the vaccines, a technological capacity, and a logistical capacity to vaccinate, because there's the public health is specialized in vaccinating people in Brazil. So all the producers wanted to test here because it's perfect for testing. They couldn't test in Cuba, for instance, because it's a very small country, and there were few people with the disease. Here in Brazil, many people with the disease, and the federal government rejected all these demands from the producers to test the vaccines, to vaccinate. They offered, and we started vaccination very late. But despite of that, very few people in Brazil don't vaccinate because they saying that they don't want, or it's against their principles of things like this. But it's an issue, and if we consider the public health from a global point of view, it's acceptable. It's mandatory, this vaccination, because it only works if all the people are vaccinated. And then I go to I don't know how to say this. Jedri, excuse me, and Thomas. The doctors and COVID, is forced labor or not? There's a common say in faculties of medicine that when they start studying medicine, medical studies, the students think they are God. Once they go out of the faculty and they go to work in public hospitals, they are certain they are God, because they choose who will live and who will die. And this is their defined situation, and they must choose who to save. I found very interesting your presentation. In Brazil, the doctors defied government. We had you said 7,000 doctors that died of COVID in the world. In Brazil, we had 1,000 who died. My university, I am director of the human sciences school, but it's a medical university at the origin. And they were excited with the challenge of the COVID. The rector said, when I was starting at the university, there was the AIDS epidemic, the starting of the AIDS and they wanted to know, to discover, to understand, and the same excitement with COVID. So they engage themselves, and now they are very tired. We had a collapse of the hospitals, all these things. I don't remember to see this discussion of the obligation of the doctors to work. It's interesting. I will search for it, but we didn't have this. We had the opposite. Doctors who defied the government to work, and a very terrible thing. Some hospitals, some private hospitals, who forced the people to take a COVID kit with a malaria medicine, who is not effective to COVID. And many people died because of it. They said it was a prevention thing. And some doctors came out to denounce the authorities from these hospitals because they forced them to, well, this patient is 2 weeks in the special unit, intensive unit care. They came out. We need this space. And well, from this reason and others, that Bolsonaro has 6 times denounced in the International Criminal Court. But what is your work? There is I would say a kind of a classic case of public policy study, because we discovered that the standard transmission of decisions is ineffective when there are crises like this. So it's a classic case of public policy. We must bring scientific authorities, and there are political authorities and citizen and the global community. And this is not easy to do. Well, these are the comments I thought about seeing the presentations. I would like to read the papers, if you had the papers after. And I found interesting because I thought many things that could be, I believe, a comparison with what we have in Brazil and what you have in basically Europe. It could be very interesting. So I don't know how many times I talked about. I think it's better to hear you now, and maybe some questions, I don't know, from other people.
Thank you very much.
Tatiana.
Thank you very much. Actually, not only for you, Professor, but for all of us, for all participants. We are late, out of the time for 15 minutes by the moment. So probably, I think, probably we will, I don't know, Jerzy, how we will work with the thesis. Will it be somehow elaborated to the papers, articles, or?
Yes, I hope that tomorrow Oscar Perez de la Fuente will announce the detail in this issue. Tomorrow, okay. And however, yes, we consider to publish this such book. Yeah, I had a request during the first session. Professor Becker said that the papers were very good, so it is good reasons to publish it. Yeah. However, I have one question to Professor Brunner, because you mentioned that if I may, of course, because I know that the roles here are different. However, my question is about democratic and non-democratic countries and COVID-19, because I think, okay, we have, for example, case of China and Taiwan. So, and it seems that Taiwan found the better way to combat with pandemic, yeah. So, however, of course, maybe example of Korea, North and South, of course, yeah. Of course, it depends on the level of life, etc. Yeah, GPD and etc. So maybe this is a reason why some countries can. However, of course, after many weeks or months of silence in China, when finally they announced, okay, we have the new virus, they very quickly to solve this problem, it seems, yeah.
Yeah, I would add one more thing. The China was the first country to deal with this. So they didn't have the opportunity to see what others did. Taiwan and others, Korea came after. There's I would say, not only the political authority, but the social discipline in these society is very important. In Brazil, people go motorcycle to do motorcycle with their helmets here. How to convince people to wear masks? So many difficulties like this. People are rebel. What makes more I don't know the word, difficult to understand is countries in Latin America that saw the pandemic coming and didn't prepare themselves. At the first moment, there was this authoritarian countries can cope more effectively with the pandemic, but only at the first moment, in the first months, because the collective response, the union of countries or society, is better.
Thank you very much. It seems that we have another question, if of course we can ask Władysław Ninchenko.
I think that if we already later on and still are allowed to work, so why not to complete the discussion if somebody wants? Yeah, please, Władysław. I'm sorry, I'm just
very shortly, Władysław.
But I'm here. I'm just I have another event very soon, so I'm just jumping here. But I'm with you still. So
if you have to go, of course, don't worry.
Yeah, but I would like to listen to.
Okay.
It's interesting, it's my profession. Yeah, please, Vladislav. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, let me thank you for such an interesting insights and presentations on the topic. But my question is to Professor Tomasz Litvin. You mentioned the argument supporting the obligatory vaccination against COVID-19. And my question is, do we have any specific documents that could mention this obligatory vaccination, which is just justified by the protection of public health associated with the protection of the life and health of others? Do we have specific documents where we can find the article connected to this? Because, when you are have a discussion with the people who is against the vaccination, I think it's important to refer to these articles, because it's very hard to prove anything if we just state in general the argument. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, generally the vaccination, obligatory vaccination are conducted basing on the adopted laws. But what are the more general basics than the detailed laws? We for example can find the judgments that are not concerning, yes, I will agree, that are not concerning the obligatory vaccination on COVID-19, but they concern the obligatory vaccination in general. So we have the case of Wawrzyka and others versus Czech Republic before the European Court of Human Rights, where the European Court of Human Rights stated that the vaccination of standard obligatory vaccination of children is in conformity with the European Convention of Human Rights. Moreover, in this case, the European Court also regarded as in conformity with the European Convention, the fees for parents who don't realize the obligation of the vaccination of the children. And also in this case, the court accepted the rules of law that not allow the not vaccinated children to attend to the public preschool. And we have very interesting judgment from the United States. It's from 1995. It's Jacobson versus Massachusetts, where the US Supreme Court regarded as the legal the vaccination on smallpox, where the not vaccinated person was in danger of receiving the fine of $5. But remember, it was 1905, so I'm not sure how much the $5 was at that time. Okay. I think that. Okay, thank you.
May I comment here?
Sure.
Maybe it would be interesting to look at this issue doing a parallel with the laws obligating to wear a belt in cars. Because there is a similar question, the individual liberty and the state that force people to wear belts, and they are fined. And also laws that forbid smoking in public spaces. Maybe it would be interesting to look at these laws and these things.
Okay, I think that we actually managed to work and even a little bit discuss. I'm really happy to see you tomorrow, or if you will join not the session when I will be also give some kind of report. And I would like to give a word to Jerzy for a kind of
However, first of all, I would like to thank to Chair, of course, for leading this session, and also for discussion, because your comments was very fruitful, I think, for all of us. So tomorrow we'll start at 10:30. Please remember that for tomorrow will be another link to the Zoom platform. I hope that you've received these links in my mails. And because tomorrow we will celebrate the Human Rights Day, and we will have 2 sessions and one special plenary sessions with 2 keynote speakers, Professor Felipe González Morales, United Nations Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights of Migrants, and Professor Alexander Sungurov from St. Petersburg, former RC26 chair. So thank you very much for joining this conference, this session. I hope that we'll meet tomorrow morning. It depends, of course, on place in the world, because it's I'm sorry, Professor, that I'm afraid that 10 o'clock, it is very early time in São Paulo. I'm sorry. This is for black side of video webinarium, in fact. So, however, once again, thank you very much, and I hope we will meet tomorrow, and we will celebrate the Human Rights Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.